Welcome to Transforming Trauma. Sure they feel protected. I'm humbled by the opportunity to host them and hope you'll hear yourself in these conversations and realize you're not as alone in the struggle. Maybe it'll inspire you to connect with someone you love about your own recovery. Transforming Trauma is presented in partnership. I'm so excited to announce Rachel Grant, who's with us for this episode of Transforming Trauma. It's a very special evening. It's been a couple of years now since Transforming Trauma was born into existence, and I'll never forget the day. I remember being outside of my work office and just kind of brainstorming with Rachel, kind of leaning into what a new possibility for our collaborations together. And I couldn't really believe like the idea of me having like a podcast segment within the Beyond Surviving podcast. And yeah, it just like has been such an incredible journey and part of my healing and recovery to have this like routine creative outlet is how I often think about it, where I've been able to lean into my edge of like the messiness of quote unquote like producing something and like not needing it to be perfect and allowing there to be room for growth, like knowing I could always get better and continue, finding like a mic that works for me, or finding like, aiming towards a goal of like what types of guests I would bring on. And Rachel's just been such a cheerleader, as she is for all the people in her life, I'm sure, just like every step of the way. And it's been wonderful to feel her support and now to have her here for a special conversation. So welcome, Rachel.
Thank you, Eve. Oh my goodness. Yes, I am thinking back to that day too, and you are already supporting me. We had already started to kind of collaborate in some interesting ways. One of my favorite things that's unfolding in the world of my work is how graduates are becoming more and more a part of the team of people that I get to work with every day. And you were there doing that. And yeah, absolutely. Just in that space of, hey, what about? And for me, that's always one of my favorite things about collaboration and just creating space for opportunities to happen. And the best things get born out of it. This Transforming Trauma series has really been this extra little like touch of spice every single month that people can look forward to and tune into. And exactly that, kind of watching you grow, right? I was still kind of in the early days of the podcast myself. So it's so nice to be here, just connecting with you today, and looking forward to chatting and catching up and having a great conversation for sure.
Thank you. Absolutely. I'm reminded actually a year ago, like this month, obviously at the beginning of the pandemic, I was sitting in the same room in front of this same mic and camera. And I haven't done many video recordings of Transforming Trauma, but I did get to do one with Emmy from Blooming Forward, who has like a major kind of Instagram following and new coaching practice as of this past year. But she had said that Transforming Trauma and Beyond Surviving podcast was one of the first like resources that she found when she was looking for podcasts. And fast forward to today, like she's done so much amazing work. And I just remember that gave me such pause, because it just feels like the podcast community and even like coaching world has just like evolved and changed so much in the past several years that it's kind of amazing that there are like more trauma coaching resources of sorts. But also I've been just reflecting lately on how unique it is, like what work you're doing and we're doing. And just like a lot of people say, like, who's like a sexual abuse recovery coach? Like, I just remember when I first saw that scrolling
Nobody,
through
because I made up
LinkedIn.
the title.
Exactly, but like, little did you
Yeah,
know, like,
little did
how
I
many
know.
people would, I don't know, you tell me when you first started doing
Dang.
this, was there like a coach with every type of name, like a dog coach
Oh
and
my
a
God,
plant
coach. Yeah,
coach?
well, truth, exactly. Yeah, that's so true. That's so true. I mean, I want to just give a nod to this podcast in general. I think it's really tricky when you're creating content like this that you don't necessarily get immediate feedback. And that's okay. That's not what we're necessarily doing it for. But what is fascinating to me is how many people do start to, kind of name, oh, I first heard you on the podcast, and then I this, and then it's almost like this becomes it's like a front door for people. It's a gentle way for, folks who are exploring healing from sexual trauma to dip their toe in. And I think, I'm going to give myself a pat on the back. I'm going to give you a pat on the back, because I think we really take it up a notch. And what we're trying to accomplish by way of these conversations is to really bring people not just, information, but things they can do, strategies. This is one of the things I so appreciate about the segments that you do. There's always this little nugget of, and why don't you try this? Or here's something that I do. So, when I first started out just in general in this work, I was graduating, from a master's in counseling psychology. And there were a couple of coaching classes or frameworks, like that framework was introduced in the program, but it certainly wasn't like the thing. But I knew that that's what I wanted to do. As soon as I had that first like group coaching class, I was like, oh my gosh, this is exactly how I want to show up, how I want to interact with my clients, the approach that I want to take. So I started researching, and I could not find anybody who was working with sexual trauma through the lens of coaching. Many years later, I did happen upon a couple of people who were parallel to me, but it just wasn't popular enough and didn't have enough traction yet. So yeah, in the name of carving my own lane, I just said, okay, well, I'm just going to call myself this. I actually started out as a trauma recovery coach, but I soon changed that to be more specific, because trauma was just not clear enough. It was bringing in all
Mm.
sorts of things, like people with TBIs and things like that
Yeah, the
from
power of
traumatic
naming
brain injury.
things.
Yeah, exactly that. And here we are 14 years later, right?
Hmm. 14 years. Wow.
14 years.
Do you
It's
celebrate
so,
that as an anniversary?
yes. Oh,
What's
yeah.
the,
I
do you
celebrate
know the date?
hard.
Yeah,
Every January, I have a full on, like, yeah,
I
because,
love that.
this is, first of all, the fact, I went full time in 2014, I think it was.
Mm.
And so just the liberation factor for me, especially starting from the place of, God, there was a lot of fear. There was a lot of doubt. Like, is this even going to work? How is this
Mhm.
going to happen? Who's going to call me up and talk about, like, I was sexually abused and let's have a conversation? I don't know you, but it's been beautiful. The fact that, I mean, what we both know, that people who go through trauma, yeah, there's sometimes a lot of fear, but there's also a lot of determination that comes. And when you are resonating with something, something speaks to you, going ahead and taking that action becomes a little bit more doable. So every January, I have a little celebration in honor of all of the men and women who have trusted me along the way, who have given me the gift of being their mentor and their guide. And I celebrate all of my growth and how much, every year, it's just learning new things and continuing to grow as a person, as a coach, as a mentor, as a leader, as, these sorts of things. Yeah.
Mm. I love that. And one of many things I've learned from you is the value and like transformative nature of like celebrations and rewards. I know that that's something we talk about a lot with Beyond Surviving clients, and it's definitely something that I use in my other clinical work and my personal life. And it's interesting that in my own like social work training, that's not really something I've
Not a
talked about.
thing.
So I feel like when I first started working with you, I was like, this is different. And now I have such appreciation for it. It's like so obvious, like, reinforce the good and
Yeah.
celebrate and enjoy. And it's just like in the realm of like positive psychology. Like, why are we so focused on the
Mhm.
brokenness and deficits and mental
Mhm.
illness and PTSD? Like, when the flip side is like our wellness, our joy, our gratitude, our abundance, what lifts us up. And I feel like you just exude that. When I think of you, I think of like the flip side of almost like the mental health care system. Like, this is what's possible.
Awesome. That's dope.
This is your potential. And
I
I
am the
feel like even
antidote.
what?
I'll
The
take that.
antidote.
I'll take that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I just want to say too that people ask me sometimes like what the most healing modality or system is that I've encountered in my recovery, and I always come back to like survivor community. And I also think of you when I think of survivor community, and I could not have known that when we first met, because it was us working together one on one. And then um, even like when I was doing the podcast at first, it was just me in my room talking to myself,
Right.
and then I was like,
Yeah.
something's not right
What am
here.
I
Like,
missing? What's happening?
where are my people? Like, that's a strength of
Yes.
mine, is like my relationships. It's how we're traumatized in relationships, and it's how we heal in relationships. And I always remind myself and others of that. So yeah, it's been beautiful, to your point about
Mm.
like alumni, just to so organically feel drawn. I'm like, can I interview this person? Like, it's just like I encountered so many incredible people through the survivor community that you have
Mhm.
grown, planted, seeded. I don't know what to say, like nourished. I mean, you probably are humble and will just say that you like created this container or whatever. I'm gonna just say, like, you do so much to tend and
Mm.
support like these relationships in
Yeah.
so many little and big ways. Like, I could just go on forever about it. Like the volunteer program to support the healing from sexual abuse. We
Mm.
can link to that in the show notes if people are interested in connecting in that space, if you aren't already. But it's, there are people who are trained and every day supporting people, developing relationships, helping make
Yeah.
connections to resources. And I'm just like blown away by how transformative survivor community is, and how
Mhm.
one person such as yourself has been able to build a team and build like, engagement. It's not, there's so many like online spaces these days where you can engage. So
Mhm.
I mean, I'm going in lots of directions here, but my point is just that there's something very unique that you've been doing, and
Thank
I'm
you.
just so grateful to be part of it, a small part.
Not a small part. No way, Chica. Yeah, you are integral to the Beyond Surviving spaces and communities. One of the things that, as I was developing the Facebook community, I started out really under this. I actually was hiding a little bit in it because I first called it Real Talk with Rachel. I didn't even own it fully, like what we were
Mhm.
really up to there. And I can't remember when I pivoted, probably about I want to say 3 or 4 years ago. But there were maybe about 1,500 people in that group under that lens and kind of there talking and connecting. And then I can't even remember what made me do it or why I did it, but I just said, this is not what this group is. What this group is healing from sexual abuse. So all I did was go online. I changed the title of the group, and the next day there were 1,000 more people in that group. Like almost, I'm like exaggerating a little, but let's say in a couple of days, okay. And
Wow.
I immediately was like, "Oh man, okay, the door is open. People
Wow.
have been waiting to come in, and here
Wow.
they are." And they just kept arriving and arriving and arriving and arriving. And I thought, okay, there's no way I can keep up.
Yeah.
And when I think
How
about
many? How many are we at now
we're at
around?
like 5,500. Yeah.
Wow.
And usually we're growing at about 100 people a month, which just speaks to the devastation that sexual trauma is causing, in this country, around the world. We have a very beautiful community of people from all kind of shapes and spaces and places and, identities and all of that, which I am really proud of. But I just had one of those moments, Jocelyn, in the world of what is it that I'm really trying to create here? Because I want to be engaged. I never wanted it to become something where I was just like the brand or the face, of a thing, but not really there, not really connecting with people. But I also knew at the pace that people were posting their questions and needing support. And so that was a real stretch growth opportunity moment for me. What are you going to do? And that's why I just started the volunteer team. And this volunteer team now, like, they're so interconnected. They're their own little beautiful community themselves, right? And I could not. And you served on that. You served as a facilitator on that. Like, you got me going. You helped me think through the training of that. Like, that was really integral, the work that we did together to come up with, how do we even train people to do this? Because yeah, some of them have backgrounds, but we all know that just because you have training, that doesn't necessarily even mean much sometimes. But many of them are just people who've had the experience and they want to give back to their community, which is a beautiful thing. So I'm really thankful for all of them and the work that you did there and contributed towards helping me to build that community and create that structure so that container can really thrive and be a place where, exactly as you say, we heal so much just from hearing each other's stories, even just having a place where you can say the shit that's on your mind and you can get it out there and you can name it, is such a freeing, healing thing. So that in many other ways that you've influenced and supported me along the way and the work that I do. Yeah.
Thank you. Your comments just now reminded me of something I've been processing lately around, like, when one is not heard in their family system, they kind of need to go elsewhere to survive and look for places and people who can hear them. And I feel like that just really rings true for a lot of the people I've met within the Beyond Surviving community world. And just wondering if you have anything to say about how that has shown up in your experience in terms of breaking the silence.
Yeah. Well, my favorite word is family. And it's really so in my own life. And I think it's certainly the case for so many people who've experienced trauma and have been rejected or ostracized or not believed by their family of origin, maybe all or at least parts of the members of their family of origin. And, that kind of dismissal, that kind of outcasting, it really takes a hit to our sense of self. Ultimately, family is supposed to be this place where we feel the most connected, the most seen, the most understood. These are the people who hold all of our history, our legitimate origin. And man, that wounding is deep. But the beauty, what I have witnessed and what I've seen, certainly in so many of my clients and in the participants in the Facebook group, is that it's not a replacement, but man, can it do a lot, a lot, a lot. It can go a long, long way to know that there are people there who really see you, hear you. One of the things that Brene Brown says that I just love about connection is that it happens when you feel seen, heard, and valued without judgment. So this is exactly why people are, struggling with their family, because they're not being seen or heard or valued without judgment. And so to have a place where they can come and get that, I think that's a beautiful, amazing thing. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It makes so much sense. And it's a sign of resilience, right? That when you don't get your needs met, you keep hunting until you find it.
Where
And
else?
it's like our
Where else?
innate
Where else?
drive
Where
to
else?
survive.
Yes. Yep. That's right. That's right. It's, I think that in the context of creating community, it's, for me, the thing that will most live on after me is my hope, right? Like, there are certain things that may not continue, but I think that world, even if it's not the exact Facebook group, but I think that I think the people who come into these communities and come into, like, the Beyond Surviving world really get it on a very deep level, how critical it is that we create connection, that we create community, and that we keep doing that, because it's really what sustains us in so many ways.
Hmm. Absolutely.
Mm.
I'm thinking about like as a survivor and a coach and a therapist, and recognizing how many people with trauma histories, devote their careers and purpose in life to giving back, becoming a helper, going into some sort of helping profession. Like if you might share like what are some challenges, if any, that you experience or have experienced doing this work, and also having your own history, like kind of those bad days or months, like what
Mhm.
is a challenge you've experienced and how do you work through it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's a long list because, I think just in my own process of healing, by the time I said, all right, I'm going to give this a shot and see if the things that I've done that seem to have really helped me shift things, experience myself differently, experience life differently, wake up to the world differently. Let me see if this actually could work for other people. I think the very first hurdle that I had to overcome was just overcoming that fear. At that time in 2007, I had just gone through this terrible divorce, and I was in many ways disconnected from community. I was going to church at the time, so I did have that community. I had the family that I was working for still as a nanny. Love those kids. But and so I went to the pastor at the church where I was still going, and I just brought it up and said, "Hey, I think I want to put together a class." But at that time I didn't have any formal training. I just had some instincts. I had a book that could,
Hmm.
help me create a little bit of structure, and then I was adding on kind of my own things that I thought would be helpful and meaningful. So one of the first, like, a lot of times, even till still today, after 14 years of doing this work, after actually I did get my master's in counseling psychology, I did get some training. I still get grief from people. What are you doing? You shouldn't be doing this work. What the hell is a coach doing? Blah, 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 blah.
Hmm.
And so I'm very thankful for those early days of like really having to face this idea of like imposter syndrome, or like, am I good enough? Am I qualified enough? Who am I to really step in, and, all of that. Those were some of the first hurdles that I had to really overcome. And then I think as I started to move and get really comfortable and confident in at least the coaching side, like, hey, I think I've got something here. I think this works, and I think I'm good at this. Um, then the other side became but how do I run a business, right? Exactly that. Like, whoa, there are a lot of moving parts here, and I've got to be a CEO, and I've got to market, and I've got to, think about advertising, and I've got to think about branding. And I just like, there was just this mountain of things, but it reminded me in many ways of like the mountain of trauma that I felt like I had to unpack. So a lot of the same kind of strategies that I used to break down trauma into like its little bitty parts, take it bit by bit, not
Hmm.
try to do too much all at once. I then took that and tried to apply that to how I approached building my business. And, there were things that I dreamed of when I started imagining what the world of Rachel Grant coaching would look like. Um, what would it include? What would it involve? What would I be doing? I had a long list, and a lot of it felt really like impossible. Like, I don't know how I'm ever going to get there. One of those things was doing retreats. And last year I did a retreat.
I love
I did
it.
it, right? Live retreat in person. This year, I'm going to be doing that again. We're going to do it virtually just so that everybody can stay safe, because we're not
Uh-huh.
quite yet out of the woods with all this stuff. But my partner, Ashley Easter, and I are coming together again this year to do Emerge, Unleash Your Empowered Self, which is this beautiful talk about creating container and community, right? And now I'm doing it in partnership with Ashley, and this space where women can just kind of drop in and really begin to explore how to step into their full empowered self how to do things like feel their feelings, really be embodied, build that sense of support and community that you're not doing it all on your own. I mean, that's one thing that's for damn sure is there's no way that I could do any of this without all of the people along the way who have backed me up, supported me, and encouraged me. Because as many naysayers as there have been way more people
Mm.
who have said, go for it, keep going, you're doing great, this is
Wow. I
amazing.
just love that. I like almost have the chills. I'm just having such a moment of like clarity of like I don't want to take my power away and giving it to all the people who've come before me, but it's not a coincidence that I love to partner and collaborate. Like it again just feels like and pay it forward doesn't even kind of quite capture it. It's just feels like I'm imagining like a circle and I sometimes joke we're part of a club no one wants to be a part like no one wanted to be a
Yes,
part of
girl.
and
That's
here we
right,
are. I'm
though.
sure I took that
Yeah.
from someone else but I don't
Yeah.
remember who but I'm just right now I'm planning a little fundraiser yoga meditation event next weekend with a sister friend of mine, collaborator, and it just feels so like natural and right to like
Mm-hmm.
not do things alone when you can do them with other people and share the work and share the fun. And you have just set such a good example of that, like that is part of the dream, like to
Yeah.
lift up other people. And that feels like so in line too with the podcast. Like I feel like it started and I've been thinking a lot about like what it means to be like a white woman in particular and like how to
Mm-hmm.
decenter like my story from the work that I've been doing because so much of my advocacy and coaching interest sort of came from my own experiences and my own
Yeah.
recovery and so you always give me a lot of food for thought in terms of like what it means to like own my story and name it but also like it's not about me like kind of step out of the
Mm.
way and like
Mm-hmm.
allow myself to like live my like story and lessons like
Yeah.
just through how I show up and to like make space and lift up other people like
Yeah.
it's been an interest I mean you've seen me through through this process it's like a coming out sort of
It
growth process
is. It
every month and year
so is. I
there's new
know.
new new milestones and it's
Yeah.
incredible just to see to like shift into like the beyond surviving graduates to see the changes that they go through in
Growth.
just 4 months. I'm like, you're doing what now?
I know. I know. Isn't it? I mean, how fucking lucky are we? So sorry to drop the F bomb, but I can't even. It is effing lucky. It's not just lucky. Like that we get to be a part of people doing that, watching them do that, seeing them go from those places of feeling broken, feeling beat
Mhm.
down, feeling like nothing's ever going to get any better. And then it's like, oh, wait, what? You just sent me an email saying you just did what? From things that feel so maybe minor, but they're really major to big, 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 big life changes. And I get overwhelmed with it sometimes. Yeah, especially when I start getting like the baby pictures. I'm like, oh my gosh, there's a baby beyond survivor. Like in the sense of this little child is going to get to grow up with an adult in their life that has these tools and is intent on, sharing them and passing them down, the breaking of those legacies of trauma and starting new legacies of
Mm.
thriving and health and nurturing and love and stability and strength. Um, it's beautiful. And I've certainly been witness to your growth and your, coming of age in so many ways. You've seen me coming of age in a lot of ways, like Rachel,
Mhm.
grow up. You got to start paying attention to these things. And anywho, yeah, it's really fascinating to see that work and to see the journey that people go on. um, yeah, man, mind blowing, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. There's something that I feel like you and I haven't talked about a lot. And I'm just curious, like in terms of prevention, like I sometimes get
Mm.
sort of sick of like talking about recovery and I get really fired up about like I don't
Prevention.
want to
Yeah.
be like in this world of like you said how many hundreds of people like it's just heartbreaking
Yeah.
and empowering to be in such community. So Is there anything like lately that you've been thinking about or have thought in the past in terms of like how
Mm.
you see prevention of sexual abuse?
When I think about this particular aspect, I'm so, so clear about why I am doing the work I'm doing in the part of the fight that I'm doing it. Because as soon as I start to think about prevention, like everything in me gets nauseous. Like I
Mm,
really shrink. Like I don't even know where to start. And that's not necessarily true. I have ideas. I
mhm,
have thoughts on the matter, right? And perspective on the matter from my own experience and from my, years of working
mhm,
in this field. But there's just like that world of how do we begin to decrease the actual acts of sexual violence and sexual trauma.
mhm.
Like, whoa. I think my mind literally just freezes, Jocelyn.
Wow.
And I'm just like,
Well, I feel like you said it though, in terms of interrupting the intergenerational cycle of
well,
trauma. Like
that's definitely a
that's a
part of
huge
it.
part.
It's a huge part. I think that, yeah, for sure, for sure. So in some ways, like, it's an interesting thing. That's amazing. This is why I love you, Jocelyn. I was like, oh, that's interesting. I just got a point of clarity. Like, I am actually working in the world of prevention through
Yeah.
the lens of stopping patternings that lead to continued ongoing, abuse trauma. I think I hold a somewhat
So now
like
you can say sexual abuse prevention and recovery coach.
oh man, the title's
2021,
getting
baby.
longer and longer and longer. Oh man. Yeah, I think that what I'm really, really thankful for is that there are people who are super, super called to put all of their time and their energy focus on that piece of the problem. And I love the organizations that are out there, doing that kind of work. And I think of my role oftentimes as being a supporter of those organizations and championing them and just leaning into them in ways that are really helpful wherever I
Mhm.
can. I mean, here's a
I also
question.
I also want to say that like education and raising awareness through like
True.
social media platforms, through you sharing your story in all the myriad of ways, through a podcast, through a monologue, like you're constantly making like yourself and this work visible, and that is prevention too, because people
Yeah.
share that material, they learn from it, they heal from it. So I feel like,
Thanks.
yeah, there's a lot more maybe to prevention. Maybe the term is like feels a little bit like
Maybe the term
intimidating.
is too constrictive. Yeah, actually, that's what I was just starting to wonder is that,
Mhm.
like, for me, when I think about prevention, I guess underneath all of that is I hold a general belief that we will never completely, fully, 100% stop sexual abuse or sexual trauma. So the lens that I often think about this through, the actual problem for me is not stopping abuse from happening, because my answer to that is I don't think that's doable. I don't think that's possible. But what I think is doable and what I think is possible is preventing long-term impact. And by way of that, I think there's a lot that we could do to make sure that the impact of trauma is minimized as much as reasonably possible, by way of making sure that kids are really bolstered, kids are really shored up with knowing how to like take care of themselves in a moment of trauma, like how to get support, how to get resource, how to speak up, these sorts of things. Like if we could just make sure that there's a lot of information out there, then maybe we could prevent this from being the thing that people are talking about 30 years later after it's happened.
Right.
But instead, there's a more immediacy
Mhm.
to the response and to the healing that can happen early on,
Yeah.
so that the lives of those impacted by abuse and trauma aren't derailed for
Mhm.
as long.
Mm. Yeah, I immediately thought of like male identified survivors and like your interest in making sure that there's a space and a place for male survivors in your work. And it's really impacted me in recent months, especially, and feeling really called to like move and into that space more and recognize
Mhm.
like all the barriers for our brothers to, identify as a survivor, to get
Right.
support, to get help. So I'm just thinking of like that, the outreach and awareness, and
Yeah.
yeah, the
Yeah.
healing that can happen when we realize like who's not showing up for coaching or
Exactly.
therapy or whatever it is,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
who's not here and why. Yeah.
That is such wow. Yeah. It's so very true. One thing that I've really seen in this last year is 2020, I had the most male clients that I've ever had, like all in one, in 1 year. So that tells me there's something shifting in the atmosphere for male survivors. Very similar to, I think, for women, decades ago, when there was this kind of, we're going to be seen, we're going to be heard, we're going to get support, we're going to demand that there become resources available to help us. I think men are in that part of their journey. And of course, advocating for that and supporting that, I absolutely think that's a huge part of my role. And I think that also goes for women of color. I think we're seeing, underserved populations there. And this is particularly daunting when we know that a high percentage of women of color experience trauma
Mhm.
that outpaces other women. So this is a great question that you just posed, like who's not showing up and why? And through your lens of social justice, right? This is something you're so passionate about. This is one of the things that I love about being in conversation with you, because I think you certainly have your finger on the pulse of social issues and like what's happening in the world around us. I can be a little bit in my bubble and like, okay, I've created my little world and these are the things that I do and this is how I do it. Um, but so what I always appreciate about our conversations is you cause me and make me like look up, look around, like take it all in. So I'm just curious through your perspective, like what are you seeing has been maybe some of the shifts and like what are you hoping to see maybe, next in this world of kind of social justice, awareness around sexual trauma, healing?
Yeah, gosh, I wish I had like a one liner to kind of sum up that question. Just as you were talking, I was like thinking, are we going to talk about what's going on in the news today? It just feels like, I know I've said this to you before, but it's like overwhelming. I think for
Hmm.
a lot of people with trauma histories, it's really tempting to just turn it off entirely. I'm not speaking about you in this moment, but I do that like quite regularly because I
Yeah.
just don't know, because I care so much. And I think a lot of us with trauma histories are like hypersensitive and have huge hearts and are helpers and sometimes want to take on the burdens of the world and feel like that calling to like pay attention to every like horrible tragedy going on. I know
Yeah.
growing up, my mom used to like run from room to room being like, did you see that plane crash? Like, I'm like, there's a million people, like, there's so many issues. And so I
Yeah.
guess I just like in this moment, I'm just feeling like struck by like, yeah, the amount of like pain I feel like I'm holding for clients right now who,
Mm.
are bearing witness to these terrible transphobic like bills that are like
Yeah.
just horrendous. And I'm
Yeah.
thinking about like more Black lives being taken in like
Just
incredibly
yesterday.
heartless, like, what
Hmm.
was that?
Oh, I was just saying just yesterday, the
Yeah,
20-year-old.
yeah, just yesterday. And
Hmm. Yeah.
so the question feels like so important. Like what am I seeing or feeling? And I'm
Yeah.
just sort of like at a loss right now. I know we all have like our own spheres of influence and like you said, like our own lanes. So I guess I'm still figuring that out for myself. I've been
Hmm.
doing a lot of like processing around my dreams lately, not like
Hmm.
what I'm sleeping dreams, but like what I'm here on this
Vision.
planet to do.
Nice.
And I have so many, and I love just talking about like all of them. So I'll be with my friends over the weekend and just keep talking about different dreams. And I feel like they think I'm like, I don't know, like, well, didn't you just say you wanted to do this and now you want to do that? Like,
Just say
but
I'm an extrovert. That's how it goes. Okay.
I just feel like I'm in a place of like possibility and expansion and growth, and it
Yeah.
feels really rich. Specifically,
Mm.
like I feel really called, maybe in part because of the pandemic, to lean into like supporting healthcare workers, and that's, you
Mhm.
know, folks, professionals, providers. I don't love the word professionals, but people with lived experience who are in helping professions. Like I was just watching a training this week about like self stigma and how many providers
Mm.
like don't get treatment because of their own internalized stigma,
Yeah.
and like thinking, oh, they should know how to do
I
these
should be
skills.
okay. I do this for a living, like all that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and then, like, the trainer didn't address the systemic reasons why people don't always take time off for treatment. Like, I
Mm.
remember being up against that and being like, "How the heck am I supposed to get to this, like, support group and work till 5?" And just to let so I'm hopeful, maybe I can be hopelessly optimistic sometimes, but that there will be more flexibility that comes out of the post-pandemic world, like, whether
Thank
it's
you.
work from home for many more people or just the realization that like all humans benefit from flexibility.
Yes.
So I'm kind
Yeah.
of teetering into like another dream of mine around just like more universal access to
Mhm.
systems and
Mhm.
organizations and like structures just being like
Yeah.
trauma informed. I like to say trauma aware. So those are some of the things I'm feeling most passionate about right now. Like I've struggled so
Love
much
that.
with feeling like I need to I and like other people with intersecting marginalized experiences need to disclose and come out in different spaces that frankly aren't designed for us and aren't safe, and that
Mm.
we need to kind of like prove and justify like why we need X accommodation or why we deserve to be here.
Yeah.
And what they find is that most accommodations in schools and the workplace are free. It costs nothing, you know. So
Yeah,
what's that
exactly.
about?
Exactly. Exactly. So why have we gotten to this point where we think that we're giving you a gift? You're not giving me a gift. Like, this is just how it's supposed to be. Like, this is just, let's just do the right thing. Let's just do the nurturing thing and all will be well. I think what that really comes back to in so many ways is that we've really, really been sold a bill of good about scarcity,
Mhm.
that only so many people get some. The rest of you are going to have to fight and claw at each other. And that is a social structure that makes sure that the elite stays the elite because they're in their own bubble, they're separated away. And if we're all fighting each other underneath that, then we're holding each other back. We're holding each other
Yeah.
down. Right.
Absolutely, and I would name that as part of like what I understand to be like a legacy of white supremacy. And I know
Yeah.
we're nearing like the end of our conversation almost, but I welcome anyone listening to provide any feedback or questions or share your comments about this. But I have been reading a book called White Rage, and it talks about the
Mm-hmm.
history of like Black advancement, and just it's just like it's just I have no words for how many years it has taken and continues to take for there to be any conversations around equity. And just it made me think of my own experience of the more empowered I became as an advocate for those without a voice in the disabled community, those who have trauma histories,
Mm-hmm.
like the more threatened people with more power than me grew.
Yes.
Like the more I learn the language,
Yes.
I mean, there's just I feel bad or not bad, but I'm conscious of like centering my experience as a white woman and talking about white supremacy. But I'm really interested in learning more myself about the
Mm-hmm.
intersections,
Mm-hmm.
because the more I learn and study ableism, the more I understand that there is no eradicating racism without eradicating ableism, and there's no eradicating ableism without eradicating racism. So,
Yeah.
in conclusion, there's no there's
We're
no
just gonna leave it
hierarchy.
there for y'all tonight. Have a good rest of your night,
Yeah,
and
there's
see you
no
later.
hierarchy. Like I'm really
No,
I'm
it's
this
so
is
true. It's so true.
yeah.
Well, and it all plays together because in the world of sexual trauma, sexual healing, right? We're dealing with patriarchy, we're dealing with misogyny, we're dealing with the placement of women and women's bodies, men, yes, who are abused too, but that's coming through a different lens, right? That there's something else at work with that.
Right.
And so it's also very interconnected.
Mm.
And in many ways, I was just reading an article about, health and wellness in underserved communities, and how people who are really doing that work in those communities are, the first thing that they're fighting for is just to get healthy food to be
Mhm.
accessible. Like when and how did we find ourselves in a world where you can't just get fruit? Like it's literally not anywhere near your home. And like the structures that have been put in place, all the stuff that we're seeing that's going on around, the voting restrictions and rights. I could go on and on. You could go on and on. We get really passionate about this stuff because
Yeah,
at the end of the day, it all is interconnected. And
absolutely.
sometimes these solutions that seem so like, well, that's so small, but it is a foundation and a stepping stone towards changing this. And then when
Mhm.
that changes, that changes. And then when this changes. So just reiterating your point that it's also very
Right.
interconnected.
Yeah,
Um,
and
yeah.
we are like you
Yes.
and I, like the way we work together, the non-hierarchical like relationship that I've experienced working together has been like so powerful for me. And I know that we're both very interested in like trauma-informed workplaces, and
Hmm.
I've shared so many resources around trauma-informed like supervision that I've found through the Boston Area Rape Crisis Center in the past couple of years that I've just found so powerful and inspiring. And I guess I just wanted to name that, like in terms of calling people in where you work, whatever sphere you exist in, like there's something that for me feels like a way that we can drop a rock in the water. I'm blanking
Hmm.
on the metaphor, like the ripple effect that
Yes.
we can
Ripple effect.
have,
That's
even
it.
when overwhelmed by these like enormous systems of oppression and like systemic
Yeah.
oppression. It's like, oh my God, just talking about it right now, I'm like, well, this is why we sometimes have to tune out, because how are we going to take a step forward? But by me being able to say to you, hey, Rachel, like, what do you think about this? And you're saying, your ability to like not be defensive and to hear
Mm-hmm.
me, not make, assume the best intention. Like
Yeah.
I just feel really grateful for that. And I know a lot of people don't have that. And
Yeah.
I just wonder if you have any like wisdom on what has helped you to become a leader who can take feedback and keep an open mind. No, you're not like almighty, like know all boss lady.
Man, well, I think it's probably born out of having tons and tons of shitty bosses. I mean, people who talked down to me, people who I would bring an idea or feedback and perspective, and they would get super caught up and defensive. And you know, ultimately, it's probably a little bit of my country upbringing too, and certain values that my mom and my dad really expressed to me about, um, you know, about respect and about honoring the other people around you, and that leadership doesn't mean I am, um, here to tell you what to do or to belittle you, but leadership. I mean, I guess I'll have to quote Gordon Ramsay because he really is. I do have to give him some. It's ridiculous how much I've learned from this guy who so many people are like, oh, he's a terrible human being. But if you really watch him closely, he has so much awareness about the psychology of others and human beings. But here's what he says about leadership. He says, it's a really simple formula: give people the skills they need to succeed. So you first have to train, you have to teach, you have to bolster them, make sure they know what they're doing. Don't just, I think so many times I went into jobs and I was actually like made fun of or embarrassed for not knowing what I didn't know. I'm like, that's why I'm here, like to learn a job. Like, yeah, there are some things that I'm bringing to the table, but I still have to be trained.
Mhm.
So give people the skills. And then he says, empower them to do their job. So that is me getting out of the way. You're not going to feel empowered if I'm constantly on top of you and telling you what to do and, certainly shaming you for anything. And then hold people accountable. So you have to be firm, but you have to also be compassionate. And so those are the things that those are the mindsets, those are the values I think that drive and then result in the kind of working experience that we get to share and get to have together.
Hmm. You just tied that up so nicely. It's as if you like were so prepared for that question. I'm like, you are firm and loving, and wow, you really like practice that skill. Who trained you in that? But you're like, you really make lemonade from the lemons, and I really admire that, and am trying to do that myself. Like, make something from the muck that I've been trudging through, and it's like so easy to stay in it, and just I feel like I'm still sort of untangling this web of like how everything has been connected, and just like there's just the processing of those experiences before I think you can make some magic from it. And I know I've been taking steps in that direction, but I admire like just the way you I don't think that you probably had any training like specifically in what yours. I mean, maybe, I don't know, you tell me, like that it comes from this like experiential learning of
Yes.
like this happened, I'm not going
Yeah.
to do that.
Yeah, yeah. No, I've never, I mean, maybe I've read a few pages of a leadership book here or there, but most of it is coming just organically from the place of what ultimately is the underlying driving force in everything I do, which is love. I
Mhm.
think that I grew up in a time, and I grew up in a neighborhood and with people who loved the people they were working with. My dad, he worked at a zinc factory, and he would come home and tell stories about those guys, right? He would come home and we'd sit on the front porch and he would talk about his day, but he wasn't telling me about the work that he was doing. He's telling me about, Bobby just got, into a fight with his wife, and then but their kids are doing this over here, and I'm gonna go over here and help them out because their cousin just died. There was all of that. My
Mhm.
mom, she was a business owner. It's so funny, Jocelyn, like when I was when I was building my business, I was running this whole story about I'm so different from my family. Nobody gets me. I'm the first person in my family to do anything like this. And then one day I was talking about my mom, and I was like, oh yeah, she was like a bookkeeper and she had her own clients. And then literally like lightning bolt. I'm like, duh, Rachel, are you kidding me? Your mom was an entrepreneur. She ran her own business. I would come home from school, I would sit on her lap as she was doing her work. And when I was little, or I would lay on the floor and color and play, and she was there like getting shit done, and she would take me with her sometimes to go to her clients. And I think I just witnessed it. So like through this osmosis, like they shared things, they gave each other gifts. There was this like not it was in it, yes, there is a transaction, yes, there is an exchange of money and services, but it was relationship. And so I think it matters to me to keep that centered. I think it's one of the reasons why I don't let my business or want my business to get super big. I'm working with a marketing team, and there's this, oh, you got to scale. Oh, you got to scale. You're like, no, I don't. No, I don't. Because I've seen over and over and over again business owners who, when they scale,
Mhm.
your job stops being the work and your job starts being running the company.
Mhm.
And I don't run a company. I want to be in the trenches. I want to be connected with people. I want to be in relationships. So whether that's my clients, whether that's in work with you as a Beyond Surviving coach and support to my clients, whether it's with my VA, whatever it is, I think that's what really ultimately matters in the long run.
Hmm. Thank you for sharing that. It's amazing. I both feel like I've known you my whole life and feel like I know nothing about you. Like I'm just constantly learning from you and excited to continue to work together and blossom together. It's such a joy to connect tonight, and
Yeah.
there's
Thanks.
always so much more that I have to ask you. I have like a whole list of 3 pages of questions, and we were like, let's just chat. So this is
We'll
this
have
has
like a
been
question
perfect.
round someday. You could just,
Yeah, no,
we
this
could
is
just bullet round questions. But no, I so enjoyed this, and I really appreciate just coming together tonight and having this conversation. It's always a sweet thing to connect with you, Eve.
absolutely. And so thank you for listening. If you want to learn more, you can visit rachelgrantcoaching.com to learn about sexual abuse recovery coaching and explore all the resources on the site. And be sure to subscribe to this podcast. We have so much more to share. Thanks for listening.
Take care, everyone.